Hey, good people. Today in our chapter, we are going to be talking about poverty, homelessness, and criminal justice. This is a chapter that we just kind of give basic introductory information into some of these areas of working with diverse populations. So, with that being said, in this week's folder, there are several small videos that I want you all to watch, and I'll discuss some of those videos as we go throughout the lecture. When we talk about working with diverse populations, in the very beginning, in talking about poverty, it's mentioned in our book, the author Michael Harrington, and a book that he wrote in regards to, or it's entitled The Other America, Poverty in the United States. And when we think about the other America, dealing with the issues of poverty, we have to ask ourselves, how did this gentleman come up with this topic and why was it necessary to write a book entitled The Other America? So there is a video in this week's folder. It's a TED Talk video by a relative of Michael Harrington who is discussing some of the aspects of The Other America. So I'm going to ask that you watch that one first, and then there'll be other videos in sequence to follow after that one, because I really want you to think about what you're thinking about as it concerns poverty, homelessness, and criminal justice in our society. So when we talk about poverty, homelessness, and criminal justice, let's begin with poverty. As we discuss poverty, we are looking at the ideas of, oh gosh, should I stop recording? Oh, I apologize, y'all. Let me go back and share my screen again. I clicked a button and I thought it stopped. My apologies. But when we talk about poverty, the thing that we need to look at is making sure that we have clarity in the definitions of what poverty is: absolute poverty and relative poverty. Absolute poverty is something that is defined by our government standards. The government establishes an index, the poverty line, and basically it is all dependent on, the income that you receive, and how you fall on that poverty line. That's absolute poverty. Now, relative poverty is looking at your current financial situation and how it measures up against the other families or other living situations within your community. That's relative poverty. So poverty relative to what the living expectation is within your community. Absolute poverty relates to, of course, your income based on the government established guidelines. Now, when we talk about poverty and addressing that from the area of social work or the profession of social work, we know that working with people or within this helping profession, we're working with the whole person. And so that's exactly the way that we approach the concept of working with poverty. We're looking at it from three very specific theoretical perspectives: the psychological, the anthropological, and the sociological. Now, when we talk about the psychological perspective or the psychological theories of poverty, we're looking at it based on an individual's perspective. What are their motivations, their moral deficiencies? What are their behavioral traits? The psychological theories, again, looking at it from a very macro perspective for this person themselves. When we talk about it from an anthropological perspective, we're looking at the culture of poverty as a whole. Now, I need you to think about this, good people. When we talk about the culture of poverty, how are people being held accountable for being in impoverished situations? The culture of poverty, are we blaming the individual for being impoverished, or are we looking at the system? That's where we get down to the sociological perspectives of poverty. When we talk about the sociological perspectives, we're looking at the systems and kind of what's going on, the structure within society that is either enabling, that is creating, that is holding someone in this area of being impoverished. So when you read through your textbook, I want you to think about, again, the psychological, anthropological, and sociological perspectives when we're dealing with poverty. Again, working with the whole person, and make sure that we address all of the issues that a client, consumer, or patient may be coming to us with if we're talking about or dealing with issues relative to being in an impoverished situation. When we talk about poverty and services that have been made available as it relates to social work, poverty became a headline, I guess you could say, or a focal point in our country in 1963, when Lyndon B. Johnson was our president, and he declared war on poverty. And under that declaration of the war on poverty became several initiatives, and we're just going to touch on a few of those today. An initiative that is very near and dear to my heart, which started in 1965, is the Head Start project. Now, again, in 1965, it was called a project. Today, we call it a program. There's a difference in the variation of words, good people, so I need you to recognize that. When we talk about it and refer to it as a project, the whole idea was, how do we work with these families coming from impoverished situations, or that are living in poverty, and help these children to be a better fit in the educational programming system, in a public education system. So it indeed was a social experimental project, Head Start, as it started. But as funding continued, and as the positive aspects or positive outcomes of Head Start continue to grow, it then became a steady program. So we have the Head Start program, again, initiated, in 1965, near and dear to my heart, because I am a proud Head Start grad. My son is a graduate of the Head Start program. I adore the Head Start program because not only is it looking at an educational perspective for preschool age children, and earlier and younger than preschool age, but it also looks at socialization, looking at how do we make sense of our surroundings, and looking at how do we implement play in the learning process. Another project or service that was brought out of the war on poverty is called the Project Wise. And this Project Wise, the focus was all on working with low-income women in the Denver area. And working with low-income women, the goal was to provide some type of leadership and educational activities that was going to empower them. And when we talk about empowerment, that leads to our third project, or third program, which was called the Parent Involvement Program. This Parent Involvement Program was kind of like similar to what we know today as our PTOs or our PTAs. The difference with these programs is the Parent Involvement Program, it did provide a small stipend for the parents to become involved in the educational programming, or the community-based educational programming within their school system. So again, the similarities between PTA and PTO and parent involvement are that they did, and it was all around working with children in the school system, but the parent involvement program provided a small stipend for those parents who were working in that program. So as we continue talking about the concept of poverty, we get into, or we just kind of segue, unfortunately, automatically into homelessness, based on the flow of our textbook. When we talk about homelessness, good people, we need to make sure that we have an understanding about what homelessness is. So there's another video in this week's chapter folder, and the video is entitled, "I'm Not a Bum." And it is a very brief video of a gentleman who was talking about his situation in being homeless. And I want to say this to you, as he talks about his situation in being homeless, some of the things that he addresses, and I'm just trying to find it here in my slides, are very pertinent to what's discussed in our textbook. Oh, golly. Let me just go back here. It actually, it's these issues here. I'm sorry, y'all. I was a little bit all over the place there. When we talk about issues relating to homelessness, there are several misunderstandings about homelessness. And this gentleman in our video that I want you to watch, he addresses each one of these misunderstandings. When we talk about homelessness, majority of people who are homeless have mental illness. That's just a stigma. That is not necessarily the case. Shelter is sufficient and available for those who may be homeless. I need you to think about your community and where you reside. And I really want you to think about what you're thinking about when it comes down to having sufficient space available for folks who may be homeless. Is there an emergency homeless shelter in your community? If there is not, is there at least an emergency shelter for victims of domestic violence? When we talk about a place of shelter for people who are homeless, unfortunately, in rural areas in our society, there may not necessarily be sufficient space available for folks to seek shelter who may be homeless. Here in Cambria County, we used to have a homeless shelter, an emergency homeless shelter that was operating through the Salvation Army in Johnstown, but that homeless shelter has been closed for several years now. We do have another homeless shelter, however, and it is still in the city of Johnstown. It is referred to the Martha Mary House, I believe. However, there are some very specific stipulations that people need to meet before they can have or gained entrance into being able to have a temporary place of shelter. So to say that we have a specific homeless shelter, an emergent homeless shelter in Cambria County, the answer is no, we do not. So again, I encourage you to look through or to do a little investigation in your community and see if there is a homeless shelter available for folks that may be in need in your area. Another issue that is talked about that Mr. Davis in the video talks about is that homeless people are unemployed. And you will hear this gentleman talk about being unemployed and then having a desire to want to get a job, but he can't get a job because he doesn't have a phone number. He doesn't have a formal or an official place of residence. So it's not that he does not want to work. Employers are finding it difficult to employ him, to grant him employment simply because they can't reach him, also because of his appearance. So again, some of the issues we got to think about when we're talking about the issue of homelessness. We have to know that there are some very specific issues or risk factors that are associated with homelessness. We have some risk factors from a micro perspective, meaning dealing with the individual themselves, and then also from a macro perspective, the way society or the system may be functioning. And when I say the system, I mean the system of society itself may be functioning and how it is responding or providing services to someone who may be in need of or who may find themselves to be homeless. From a micro perspective, some of the risk factors that we look at would be domestic violence, a history of incarceration. We may have some issues of disabilities or medical issues. When we talk about it from a macro perspective, there may be, as I stated before, there just may be a lack of homeless shelters or reliable housing. It may be caused by natural disasters, may be caused by political uprisings or wars. We know about the effects of a natural disaster as it could impact or it pertains to homelessness. Just when we think about some of the hurricanes that we've experienced recently. When we think about the fires out in the West Coast that have been experienced recently, that's not caused by any one specific person themselves, but the outcome of it has left folks being homeless and without some place to call their home. When we're talking about homelessness, we deal with it again from the helping professionals perspective. We deal with it working with families, working with veterans. When we're talking about working in rural areas, this is where, again, as a helping professional, you have a lot of work that you have to work with, or a lot of things you have to work with because the resources are somewhat limited in rural areas. And wrapping up this whole discussion on homelessness and the social work profession, one of the big things that you will know or that you'll find that you'll be doing when you're working with people who are homeless is you need to be the voice for them. When we talk about the issue of homelessness, we need to know that sometimes it can be cyclical, meaning that there may be some underlying issues that a person needs assistance in coping with or addressing to keep them out of the cycle of homelessness. They may need to have ongoing therapeutic intervention. They may need to have ongoing financial counseling. They may need to have job training. So again, when we're talking about homelessness, there are things that could be underlying issues that you, the social worker or the helping professional, may need to address or at least help this client, consumer, or patient address along the way. When we get into the issue of unemployment, unemployment is very interesting because with unemployment, we are experiencing some issues like that right now due to this pandemic that we are experiencing in our society that has created a large number or an explosion in our unemployment rate. When we think about unemployment, we have to look at it based on an individual perspective, but also a social or an economic perspective from a global position as well. When we look at it from an individual perspective, unemployment has it can create a great load for the individual and or family. You see here on our slide, we look at it from psychological perspectives. And with the psychological perspectives, we're talking about issues of mental health, our thought process, our peace, our happiness. From a social perspective, we're looking at it again, how we're able to adjust socially and interacting with our peers and being inclusive or included in the way that we live throughout our daily basis. Excuse me, when we're talking about the consequences of unemployment, we can also see it in this multi-generational perspective. And a multi-generational perspective, we see how this impacts the behavior of our children as, again, the adults may be dealing with the financial consequences of unemployment, but it also, from the financial consequences and the psychological consequences, it does unfortunately rain down to the children, and it does impact their behavior. It could also influence their achievement in school, and it also could influence their perspective towards what working does look like, and how can I be successful in working and in finding the right type of profession to find that financial security. When we're talking about the issue of unemployment, and from a social worker's perspective or helping professionals perspective, we look at some of the services that are provided to those who are finding themselves in unemployed positions. There are, of course, coming from the working with families and couples. You have family and couple counseling, you have mental health centers, you have employee assistance programs. Employee assistance programs are generally those programs that are available through an employer, and that employee assistance program is one that it provides um, basic basic crisis intervention or short-term intervention, resource, and referral for the employee. Again, from the employer's perspective, they're providing this service so that they can try to connect the employee to available services and resources that they may need as it comes down to the issue of unemployment. Now, the very last issue that we're going to talk about in this chapter is social work and criminal justice. And so you see here in the very beginning, when we talk about criminal justice, we have a lot of different terminology that the book wants to make sure that we are clear on. It kind of gives us this idea of definitions, the direction that we're going in. What I want to look at when we talk about social work and criminal justice are some of the punishment options, as the book refers to it, and the role that you, the social worker, may play in that, or the helping professional may play. The very first one is retribution. When we talk about retribution, we're looking at an eye for an eye. This whole idea of that the punishment should be equal to what the crime was. Deterrence, we're looking at how are we preventing someone from participating in criminal behavior. Now, I need you to think about what you're thinking about when we talk about deterrence and rehabilitation. How are we preventing someone from participating in criminal activity from a community perspective, with an individual perspective, maybe working in groups or families? And then rehabilitation. How do we see rehabilitation spelled out for someone through the criminal justice perspective? And we're going to get into this a little bit more when we talk about social work in places in prison facilities. When we talk about reintegration, the whole idea of halfway houses. I try to use the term transitional housing. Halfway houses kind of bothers me a little bit because, again, our words are powerful. And so when we say halfway, we're already letting somebody know that you're not all the way there yet. You're not all the way at that place of whether it's independent living, whether it is being successful, whether it is linking back into your community. But when we use the term transitional housing, I am helping you, either helping professional and helping you transition from this place of either incarceration or being in a long-term care mental health facility. I'm helping you to transition back into, again, the community and being able to live independently from this structured setting that you're coming from. When we talk about working within the criminal justice system as social workers, you see here on this slide different components of criminal justice: law enforcement, court systems, and correctional institutions. When we talk about correctional institutions and social workers who are there, I'm just going to go up just a little bit. Social workers who are in correctional institutions, let me just go a little bit further, would be, not there, right here, looking at working with people under probation and parole, also working with folks who may be inmates in correctional facilities. When we're talking about working with people on probation or parole, again, we're talking about working with them and providing specific structured environments and structured activities that must be met. And so your position as a social worker here, again, is going to be mostly on case management. When we talk about working within correctional facilities, providing some direct inmate services, it may be counseling services that you provide. It may also be working with the families of the inmates. There's another video that I have in the folder for you all, and it is entitled Working with, I believe it's entitled Working with Incarcerated Parents, or when you have a parent who's incarcerated, looking at it from a child's perspective. So again, there's a lot of different ways that you, the helping professional, can be influential and provide assistance when working with folks who are incarcerated. When we go back, looking at the court system, let me go down there. Working in the court system, we have a position known as forensic social work. A forensic social worker is primarily working within the court system, and not that any other social worker would not provide testimony, but a forensic social worker is one who is going to have some knowledge about specific criminal justice aspects, and be able to work with this client, consumer, or patient, this former inmate, this victim, this alleged perpetrator, be able to get some very specific information as it pertains to their case, excuse me, and provide some very specific legal testimony when we're talking about being a forensic social worker. When we go back and we're looking at law enforcement, when we look at law enforcement, some of the things that we need to think about is how can a helping professional be of service to someone, be of service to police officers? There are so many different ways that we can see social work, human services, the helping profession partnering with police officers, whether it be from a state, local, or a national order, to provide some type of assistance for the people that they are providing services to. When we see social workers or therapists or community health workers who are working alongside with our police officers, we have this opportunity to have someone from the community, someone who is a professional in working in interpersonal skills, with interpersonal skills, I should say, providing crisis intervention type of counseling to help alleviate some issues that may be at hand, help working with police officers to identify child abuse, or work with victims of child abuse, filing the appropriate paperwork and all of that, providing some type of assistance to people who may be victims of domestic violence and or abuse. So we do see a lot of that where we see social work and working with police officers. Excuse me. Finally, when we talk about social work and criminal justice, we have mediation programs that we work with, victim offender mediation programs, and then there are also victim witness programs. The victim offender mediation programs are looking at how can we help this situation, how can we amend the wrong that was done, so that there is some type of empowerment that is given to the victim, empowerment of change to the offender, so that within the community, we could see some type of community healing, some type of accountability for those who offended, and empowerment for those who were victimized. When we're talking about the victim witness programs, again, this is a program where we're looking at how can we provide services for folks who may have been a victim, whether it is domestic violence, whether it is a sexual assault, whether it is a crime against property and not necessarily the person, but we're trying to provide education to the victim, but also to the court officials, so that there is an understanding of how to interact with people that are coming from this victim perspective, because there's a very different way or very different perspective that people may have who have been victimized at some point in time in the past, whether it be, again, a violent crime, whether it be a victimless, when they call a victimless crime, they're talking about crimes against an object, not necessarily you, the person, but you are impacted, but also looking at sexual and sexual related crimes. So all of these issues in this chapter, the issue of poverty, homelessness, and criminal justice. Again, there's some very interesting and insightful videos that I have included in this week's folder, and I really strongly encourage you to watch these videos, because they bring a lot more insight to the introduction of the information that's presented in the textbook on those various issues. All right, good people. So again, in this week's folder are some additional videos. There will be your discussion post, your chapter quiz, and an assignment for this week. So if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to contact me either by email, or you may message me. Contact me by email or call me on my office phone. All right, good people. I bid you love, peace, and bacon grease. We'll see you real soon.